Today on the coast of Iberia, warm ocean winds flow across the land. On the barren salt flats where bleached bones litter the ground, the wind fills the sails of salt ships. One pirate hangs off the side of their ship, an arm tangled in a lifeline that digs into his flesh. His other hand holds tightly onto his cutlass. He hungrily demands his mate steer him closer to the massive fin beast with 2 weeks of meat on its bones. Meanwhile, the wind whistles through the streets of Arong, or picks up the small flowers from the windowsills. A carpenter glances over to a second bundle of rations in his pantry. He chastises himself for his greed and tames his hunger by putting his body to work on the town's fence. Drink dribbles down a sailor's beard as he knocks back a gulp of saltfish garum, and then bites down on the empty bota bag. A moment later, the surging saw hacks through his ruined hand and prepares the stump for a hooked prosthetic. He distracts himself by looking around, and his vision is filled with people whose faces are twisted by the wind and bodies nearly broken by the flats. How long will his body keep up? An inquisitor awakens from dreams of splendor, of the joyous festivals of his youth. He shudders as he remembers last night's executions. When did he become infected by the same poisonous desires as those thieves? How long until he's done enough to finally eradicate this town's sin? There's a problem I often run into, Dokutah. We often have to make judgment calls about a potential operator's character. We collect documentation, interviews, field reports. There's rarely a shortage of raw data. But it's hard to tell which of it's useful. Can you guess why? Well, I'll admit there's more of a problem than I thought it'd be when I started this job. But, it meant something a little more universal. Imagine you could perfectly and accurately lay out all of a person's actions in front of you like cards from a deck. You still have to decide how much weight you give to each action. After all, some actions are made in moments of relative calm. Other actions are made in moments of desperate danger, like the tragedies of Chernobyl. Others when they're just one desperate step away from their life's dream, like Ferdinand, Wright, or any of the researchers so close to a breakthrough in Colombia. Others when they bear the weight of knowing that one misstep, one wrong choice, could tear their life apart, like Silver Ash in his ploys to protect Kierak. Ask yourself, Dokutah, do you feel like the same person in your moments of wrath as you do in your moments of joy? For my part, I believe that every action is meaningful and should be considered when trying to understand a person. Even if seeing the similarities between someone on a good day and that same person in dire straits can be as hard as comparing a glass of water with a block of ice at times. I was filing away Elysium and Wheaties after-action reports today, and, well, it got me thinking about all this. About fear and desire. About how the way we embrace or deny these feelings can shape our lives. I wish I could say that by the end of our talks today, you'd know the perfect balance and be able to live a flawless life. And it's true that in this tale about pirates, salt oceans, inquisitors, and sea monsters, every person makes their own decisions about how to cope. It's true that some end up far better than others. It's true that some will come across more sympathetic than others. But, and I hope you appreciate this about every case study I bring you, the difference between a heroic tale and a cautionary one can often just be luck. One man's compass, they're heading through life, shouldn't necessarily be yours just because it went well for them. Life isn't the sort of journey where we can blindly follow another's footsteps and expect to be the same person or arrive at the same end. So when I tell you about the answers others found, whether you think them heroes or villains, their ends enviable or not, their beliefs, their journeys, their ends, they're all just the raw, base material for you to create an answer of your own. Remember that you still have to interpret those lessons in your own heart, in the context of your own life, for it to really have meaning for you. I believe that only then will you find the heading through your life that's truly yours. In Iberia's golden age, her people sailed the seas and enjoyed her bounty. Even in those days, and even with Eiger technology, it was dangerous work. But the sea seemed willing to grant every desire of their hearts. Wealth, knowledge, prestige, adventure, glory, all of it for the taking. And then came the profound silence. The roaring waves fell quiet, communications broke down, and the sea that had filled their port towns with riches swallowed the land whole. The sea that had promised to dance with danger and tempted them with delight suffocated them in a torrent of monsters. There was no adventure to be had, and no treasure to earn, only an overwhelming tragedy. It silenced every desire and replaced it with a feeble hope of survival. Aftershocks of that calamity are still felt to this day. Even putting aside the seaborne, the poverty and hunger caused by wrecked supply lines has caused whole communities to crumble. Today, in the aftermath of the profound silence, you'll generally find two rallying cries. One from those who desire to sing the choruses of old, to return to Iberia's golden age and claim the bounties of the past, and another from those who've learned to fear the sea, and will stop at nothing to prevent and contain the tragedies of the past from claiming them again. To gain what you desire, to avoid what you fear, bundling up feeling and nuance to the point of almost being useless, you can put most human motivations into one bucket or the other. They're feelings so primal that they also spread pretty easily. Not that it's hard for ideas or feelings to spread in general, of course. People are inherently social animals who live in a wildly interconnected world. We all influence each other and are changed in turn. Even rejecting or rebelling against someone else's worldview is to be affected by it. Sometimes this effect is hard to see, like that old phrase of a butterfly's wings in Londinium causing a calamity in Yang. But other times it's, well, obvious. Like with Juana, pirate captain of the Salt Flats. As a long-lived Iger, she's one of the few to not only remember Iberia's golden age, but to have been a genuine part of it, though not exactly as part of Iberia's fleets. She was first mate to Captain Calixto de la Cruz. They were pirates even then, with all that entails. But regardless, she sailed the seas and knew firsthand the glory of that era. And so, after Cruz sacrificed himself to protect a coastal town from seaborne, those memories burned in her heart when she took over as captain. Every action she took since then was based on her desire to keep her promise to Cruz and reclaim her Iberian birthright of returning to the seas. Desire led her to innovating a whole new breed of salt ships and getting into the wildly illegal business of scavenging for Golden Age relics against the Inquisition's laws. Desire led her to gambling the wealth, lives, and stability of her crew to gather up the pieces she needed to get to sea. And sometimes the risk didn't quite pay off. But on the whole, her mad schemes led to enough glittering successes that, for a while, her crew let themselves be swept up in the windstorm of her desire. I guess she's a lot like her, like Teresa in that way. They both had such a strong desire, such a pure vision of the future in their minds that their yearning for it became the yearning of everyone who stood beside them. And as long as that desire resonated strongly enough, as long as they could keep believing in it, some people would let that windstorm carry them forward, even through the worst of storms, in hopes of seeing the view on the other side. But, well, that's the rub, isn't it? Sometimes, as powerful as a desire might be, it isn't compatible with everyone's hearts. And we'll talk more about that later when I get to the mutineers. But also, sometimes people can't keep believing in it. Even if the desire seems wonderful, the path to it can feel like madness, like hurtling off of a cliff and straight into the abyss. And that's where fear comes into our story proper. That's where Anastasio comes in. Now, I know. I'm painting Juana as a woman of desire and Anastasio as a man of fear. But isn't Anastasio himself compelled by desire? A desire to live, a desire to be worthy of living, a desire of flesh. Isidro says as much, and the alguacil does not deny it. But I'm not contrasting him with Juana because he's without desire. After all, Juana isn't without fear. Often, I think you'll find that conflicting feelings interact more than they negate each other. But Anastasio's desire is best seen and defined by the fear he has of it, just like Juana's desire is best defined by her reckless abandon. Anastasio sees desire as this corrupting force, and while his conclusions border on madness, there is a truth to it that makes his philosophy tempting. I don't think I have to go too deeply into it. The crimes and risks Juana and her crew engage in, including the kidnapping of our own operator, thieving, and murder, are obvious enough. And elsewhere, we've talked about the swamp, about Arturia, or the greed of Billy Mining Corps. There's no end to tragedies you can trace back to some form of desire. And I mentioned we're too interconnected for these horrors to not reach out and drag many people down. In the face of all that, I can understand the allure of Anastasio's preaching about how desire is inherently sinful. about how I must be feared and suppressed if a person is to live a so-called righteous life. It wasn't an uncommon philosophy among those who lived through the profound silence, and decided that Iberia brought that calamity on themselves by chasing their desires in the treacherous sea. Now, temperance can be a virtue, Dokutah. I'm not arguing against that. If anything, I personally have a lot of respect for people like Silence, who step up to provide guardrails and safeguards. And yet, I personally find myself disgusted by what Anastasio and some of the Inquisitors use this policy to justify. I think it just goes to show that there's no such thing as a universal truth. No such thing as a heading that will steer you well in any part of the sea. But we'll dig more into that when we get to Silver and the Corazonics. For now, I just want to make the point that a passionate enough fear can be just as much of a destructive whirlwind as desire is. It was fear of the pirates that hardened the hearts of the Inquisitors as they requisitioned predator birding beasts from the caravans. It was fear of another fall that permitted men like the Alguacil to tear across the country to recover relics, despite his fellow Inquisitors knowing of his cruelty. It was fear of past depravity that decorated Arong's gallows for crimes no matter how minor or imagined. And in these windstorms of Juana's desire or Anastasio's fear, they can often seem so much larger than life. It's part of the natural draw people like them have. But, of course, we shouldn't... Who? Wait, that's probably...
Imagínate tener una oficina para ti mismo. Ojalá tuviera una yo.
Entiendo, peludita, pero tiene que esperar. Un cuarto no cabería en tu bolsillo. Concéntrate en tu clase, y quizás...
¿Por qué tengo que sentarme en una clase de etiqueta con esos estúpidos mocosos? ¿Y qué estelados narices se supone que es esto? En serio, ¿cómo puede ser que...? ¡Au! Oh, it's you, Doctor.
Y como siempre, there's a difference between being focused and being distracted, you know. Y me preguntas porque todos ya saben de tu otro lado.
¿Qué? I'm showing my true colors? Oh, you must have misunderstood. What I meant is, I couldn't bear to be apart from you all.
Ay, claro que no, peludita.
Well then, first of all, address me properly as Señora Pascuala. A race! Excelente! Oh, Doctor, you're truly my guiding light. And Rhodes Island is the best company ever. I'll work here until the day I die.
Oh, that. Honestly, I've started to look forward to her barging in like that. Sometimes our operators just need a place where they can feel safe to let loose for a bit. Though I should have remembered she'd be getting her schedule around the time of our meeting. Sorry about that, Dokutah. Or maybe I should just thank you for helping me bend the rules a bit towards the end there. In any case, her showing up was at least timely. With all this talk we've been having about grand desires to reclaim the sea, or inquisitors who seek to steer their flock away from a path of destruction, it can be easy to forget that most people, as Zambriel would say, are looking for the practical things in life. People like Silver. He's a controversial figure. Depending on who you ask, his arrival to Arong caused the town to push away its protectors. Or his arrival allowed the people to unite and bear their hunger long enough to recover farmland and turn away from cannibalism. Those years are blurry in history's eyes. Overall, I consider Silver to be a, well, man between black and white. Most notable for being a man of half measures, or falling short when he does try. He refuses to preach further fear into Arong's heart, but does not preach against it, even as new bodies are led to the gallows. He cherishes the people of Arong, but fumbles his memories of them as individuals. He sees the danger of Anastasio, even though he lacks the resolve to stand against him, taking over to begin with. Felt comfort even at giving Anastasio the reins as long as it meant results. He's reasonably well-meaning, reasonably talented. Even his potential sins aren't fed enough to grow into something I could wholeheartedly condemn. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. The value of our lives doesn't exist in our ability to or desire to shake history. But in his case, I'm led to wonder if he's not holding himself back for a different reason. Maybe it has to do with when he was most exceptional, when he swayed the hearts of the people with the passion of his preaching. He came to regret the fruits of his passion. He saw his Ahrong, slowly withering away. He saw them lose their zeal for life and giving love as they huddled in their homes. He saw them rationing themselves to weakness, even in the days of plenty when they should have been building up their strength. Maybe he blamed himself, even if I personally wouldn't. I'll avoid getting into any clinical terms, but consider that there are a number of habits that in moments of strife and famine are important adaptations for survival. Stomping down on their basic desires to focus on rebuilding the town was important. Rationing the tiny bits of food they had was important. In the context of the days after the profound silence, their self-suppression was healthy, a sign of strength even, to be able to adapt to strife. But often you'll find that it's just as important to be able to adapt to peace. And that's something many find difficult. You've seen it, Dokutah. It's a horribly common problem among our operators, given the situations they were born in. Like what Gummy and the other students went through. Even if it hurts them now, it's not easy to let go of the adaptations that your body remembers needing to survive. Actually, let me use a more abstract metaphor, take a bit of the emotion out of it. Trees in areas with wind-based catastrophes evolved to bend easily to avoid snapping. Because of their ability to adapt, they survive the storm. But after the pressure is gone and the wind calms, the forms they've bent into aren't always good for them. Sometimes the trees even risk destroying itself or structures around it as they continue to grow along their gnarled path. But ask Mumu or Verdant and they'll be able to describe a catastrophe from a decade ago by looking at a tree that grew in calm skies for the last 10 years. Adapting to peace is not easily done, and rarely done alone. Even if with the right support, it can be done. With a bit of cabling and bracing, even the most gnarled trees can be encouraged to grow back into a healthy shape after all. And so it is with our operators, Dokutah. We can't grow for them, but we can give them the support they need to not lean on the maladaptive habits that bring them pain. To bring it back to Silver, I found myself curious how his future might have gone, if he had lived past the moment he left Anastasio to die and claimed Arong as his. I genuinely believe that despite seeing the problems of Arong, what stopped him most of all wasn't being weak or unexceptional. It was fear of doing more harm than good. It's easier to forgive ourselves for doing nothing than it is to forgive ourselves for doing the wrong thing, after all. Just like how Thorns stopped himself from taking every chance to succeed in fixing the compass, just to avoid a complete and catastrophic failure. That fear of losing what you have can blind you until you've lost a future that could be. Juana has a philosophy that puts it well. When Isidro tells her that betting everything on 1 in a 10,000 chance is gambling, not experimentation, she says, have you ever considered that the odds of getting a second chance might be even lower? Tell me, is life a gamble or an experiment? If she ever met Kirsting, I think the two of them would have gone on swimmingly. Even if I don't personally condone how far she takes it, like Anastasio, she makes a compelling point. Letting a chance slip by, even if it seems like the safe option, is a risk in and of itself. In this case, she even happened to be right. The odds of an alchemist of Isidro's talent showing up again to fix the compass were astronomically low. Now, speaking of compasses, I've wandered a bit off topic, haven't I? As interesting as I find Silver, there's something I wanted to talk about with Pascuala. Thankfully, it does still tie into a warning I want to give you. We talk a lot about cultural forces like the swamp, patterns, trends, and how they affect people. As much as it is important to understand how people tend to be, as important as it is to understand a person's background. The reason I talk to you about this is so you can help contextualize the operators you meet, not so that it can define them. Otherwise, well-intentioned or not, you'll wind up hurting people like Pascuala. She had the grit even then, despite the tragic fall of her family, to want to try and live a normal life. But the Inquisitors she met knew what desperation often did to people in her position. Perhaps some had met men like Anastasio in the past, who remained broken despite a second chance at life. Perhaps they've heard other thieves make similar promises to hers. But whatever the rationalization, their assumptions did come true. She did become a thief. She did become a scoundrel. She has an insatiable appetite for whatever pleasures she can find. Perhaps, seeing her now, they'd feel vindicated for not trusting the girl's pleas. But I'll see her occasionally, dancing happily with the operators who showed her forgiveness and kindness. I'll watch her plant her feet and stand beside her friends when they're in trouble. When I tell her that, as an operator, we can at least guarantee her a bed and a meal, I'll watch her eyes spark with just a bit of hope, even as she rolls them. And in those moments, I can't believe that anything about her life could be, should be, set in stone because of her past. No matter what goes into it, the heart still gets to decide what it wants after all, even if they need a little help sometimes. But often, those who can offer a helping hand fear being bitten more than they want to see someone saved. Are you familiar with Corazonex compasses, Dokutah? Their name stems from an Iberian word meaning heart. Legends say they point towards your heart's greatest desire, and as wonderfully romantic as I think that is, that's not exactly accurate. Instead, through alchemical arts, wisps of Corazonex scatter across the area to gather environmental information. Then they return to the compass, relay that information to the alchemist, and through a somewhat subconscious process, the information is interpreted to give the alchemist a heading. If the alchemist desires to safely navigate to or away from something, the compass really is good at pointing to their heart's desire. Of course, it might be less accurate if you wanted to point towards the potential love of your life or towards a shopping kierag with an ultra-rare Burning Beast blind box. Bit of a side note, what do you think of its data collection being similar to the way Dorothy's neurotransmitters function? In the same vein, the way that massive information is shaped by a caster's will and formed into something as straightforward as a direction reminds me of Sarka's prophecy. Sorry, I'll pick your brain on the Originium trivia later. The actual reason I bring up Corazonex is because I think it makes for a good metaphor. Just as two compasses can seek through the same ocean and bring two different headings to two different captains, so it is that two hearts, even soaked in the same influences of the world around them, can decide upon two vastly different callings. Now that might seem obvious or trivial to you, but consider how common it is for people to feel aimless in their lives, dragging their feet and slowly despairing as they hope to find a calling. Consider how powerful a motivator a borrowed calling is when you're swept up in the desires of your captain or the fears of your preacher. And then finally, consider the lengths you've seen people go through to follow their own calling. The ability to make that choice, to fully accept and commit to the direction of your heart's compass, is a powerful one. Mutineers balked at the danger Juana was willing to put them through to seek her dream of the sea. Uncharitably, you might call them cowards, but then, when they believed themselves to be fighting for the stable future they truly wanted, they sailed, without even arts to guide them, through the skeletal reef, all to chase and face down their monster of a captain. I believe that Juana herself, maternal in her own special way, wanted them to find that strength, even if it clashed with their dream of the sea. Even if she hoped Javier and the others would come to see things her way in the end. It's why she pushed Javier, who followed her out of blind affection, to think for himself and embrace whatever conclusion he came to, all the way until he found the resolve to raise a blade against her and be brought to the brink of death in defense of the mutineer's dreams he so desperately wanted to protect. And it was then, when he cast aside his indecision, when he claimed the mutineers as his crew, that they truly rallied behind him. Now, it's not that the conclusion every heart arrives at is what I'd personally consider morally acceptable, even if the conviction itself can be impressive. Juana and the mutineers were able to find truce and go their separate ways, but sometimes headings will clash. After all, Anastasio's fear and desire are both monstrously compelling. What they push him to do, to overcome, is testament enough to the strength of his conviction. Meanwhile, when Isidro was able to move past his indecision and his fear of leaving anything worse than he found it, one of the first things he decided to bet his entire self on was killing the alguacil to protect his desire to save his friends. If you see this conflict and find yourself uneasy that someone can have such a powerful conviction in such an obviously destructive path, if you're worried about becoming like Anastasio, ironically a worry that echoes his own philosophy, well, look, while it's my job to mitigate harm and risk, even I have to agree with something Isidro argued, that there is no path on this sea without risk for yourself and others, not any path you could call living. The best advice I can offer is to orient yourself and your heading whenever you can. Otherwise, you might end up like the citizens of Aron, holding tight to a heading meant to weather a storm that's passed them by. holding themselves up in their homes, too terrified to share time in the sun together, because they remember the dark days of the profound silence too vividly. Just like Corazon's compasses tend to scan the area quite a few times before the end of a voyage. It's okay if your heading changes over time, or even if you don't always feel that kind of pull. After all, even Juana, the desire for the sea so powerful that 2 generations of sailors followed her command, allowed Isidro to take her position as captain. If that seems strange to you, consider that it was her desire for the sea and her promise to Cruz that made her heart one that the crew would follow. With that desire met, she had no heading for her crew to rally behind. She'd be too much like Javier before he fully made his choice. The Thorns, on the other hand? His journey was only just beginning. And I imagine just like how I feel when I see an onboarding operator declare their code name, she must have felt a sense of excitement to see Thorns declare himself captain. Sorry if the takeaway is a little vague today, Doctor. It really is a shame that there's no right answer, but any conclusion I tried to give you, any attempt to set your heading with my own hands would feel wrong, you know? But I do hope that our talk still gave the pieces of your corazon something to bring back and consider. I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with, what convictions you decide on. Speaking of conviction, Drum Room 4 has been converted to an arcade for the next few days. What do you say we take a break and enjoy some good times while they're here? I think it'll make for a good evening, Doctor.